Asavia is the first nation I'm going to talk about. It lies far to the west of the empire. It's modelled very loosely after a sort of generic classical civilization, partly ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient Byzantium. It's a corrupt, stagnant society that spends far too much time dwelling on its past glories and not enough time thinking about its place in the modern world. But it's still one of the big six foreign nations that set world politics, of which the empire is only one. In theory, at least, it's equal in power to the empire, although in practice, its decadence and general decline mean that it struggles to exert much power compared to some of the other nations. Its languages are Romantic languages, French, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, Romanian, and the like. And it's also where the in-game language of Old Asavia comes from, Latin, which used to be a lingua franca before imperial increasingly has taken its place. Before going to recent history, I'm going to give you a short overview of the nation, which is largely taken from the wiki and edited down a little bit to take out some of the extraneous language. The Asavean Archipelago is a predominantly island culture, a small empire scattered across a sprawling mass of islands far across the ocean to the west of the empire. They were in their prime before the empire was founded and have been slowly declining ever since. About 100 years ago, the Asavean Empire had holdings all over the world. Over the last century, they've slowly withdrawn towards the west, turning their attention inwards. For the most part, the Asavean people consider their society to approach perfection. Change is considered uncouth and unnecessary and should be avoided as much as possible. They're all humans. There are no orcs in Asavia. And the Asavean people treat orcs that they encounter from elsewhere as if they are strange and magical people, with a very strong patronising edge to that feeling. The Republic is ruled by the plenum, a body that appears on the surface to be similar to the Imperial Senate, but is actually very different. Where the Senate is appointed by the people, the plenum is composed of the leaders of the plenum families, a hereditary nobility that claims descent from the Asav, the original shining mythological champions who came out of the sea to rid the islands that are now the Asavean Archipelago of monsters. In addition to the islands that make up the heart of the Asavean Republic, the nation includes a number of subject states, which are called satrapies. In theory, these satrapies are sovereign nations advised by the Asaveans, but in practice, they're dominated by them in all but name. The plenum itself is based on the island of Nemoria, in the city that shares the same name and is the capital of the Asavean Archipelago. The people of the archipelago often say Asavean in the same way that an imperial citizen might say imperial, and differentiate themselves from the people of Nemoria, who are the ruling class in their society. Recently, two of the satrapies, Maracos and Emphador, attempted to pull away from control of the Republic. The Nemorian plenum sent armies to put a stop to this insurrection, and members of the empire, mercenaries, fought on both sides, although predominantly supporting the Nemorians in putting down the insurrection. That rebellion has recently been crushed by the Nemorians and their imperial allies, ending the threat, the very real threat, of all-out civil war in the far west. One of the biggest bones of contention between the Empire and the Asaveans is the fact that their entire society is based on the ownership of slaves. Almost all manual labour and a good deal of skilled labour is done by slaves, and this class constitutes a significant portion of the population. The Asaveans are a naval power, but they're not quite the marine colossus that they once were. They've been overtaken very much by the people of the Sargothan Delves. And even the Empire in some areas. They have a lot of ships, but their designs are quite archaic and too dependent on slave labour to run their oars. Militarily, they also like to use a lot of mercenaries. Military service is not seen as as a way to achieve social standing in their society. Asavia is polytheistic, and they are open to any religion that doesn't interfere with the smooth functioning of their state. Religion is very much a matter of tradition rather than belief, but it's a very strong tradition, and their priests have influence throughout their society, helping to bind together a bunch of relatively disparate nations. The Empire, for its part, is pretty sure that these gods don't exist, but this has done nothing to dent the Asaveans' belief that their particular way of life and the gods that support it is the best thing since sliced bread. Recently, however, the Way has begun to get a foothold in Asavea, particularly among the slaves. The fact that the Way denies the reality of the Asavean gods is a matter of some concern for the Asaveans. In the last few years or so, the Empire has established a missionary presence in Lemuria at the invitation of the plenum, although that's been very far from plain sailing. I'll get to that later. Asavea has, for the most part, reasonably neutral relations with the Empire that wax and wane seemingly month by month. They do, however, have one very clear avowed enemy, and that is the Sumar Republic. Once upon a time, Asavea ruled in Sumar until the Sumash had a revolution and threw them out. Sumar and Asavea are reasonably close to each other geographically, and the Sumar would like nothing better than to tear down the plenum and convert the whole of Asavea to the Way. Sadly, while the Sumar have a marked advantage on land, the Asaveans have the advantage at sea, and there is no land connection between the two nations. As such, Asavea and Sumar are caught in something of a stalemate. And that's the Asavean Archipelago. In a moment, I'll talk about the various ways that the Asavean Archipelago, the plenum, and the people of Asavea have interacted with the Empire over the last 10 years. So, the Tarquinius Problem. The Tarquinius family are a powerful plenum family and an outspoken opponent of the Empire. They apparently never pass up an opportunity to cause trouble for Asavean imperial relations, but at one time they actually had ambitions to be imperial allies. In summer 379, about 4 years ago, the powerful Tarquinius family dispatched one of their scions, young Alonso, to discuss trading large amounts of white granite to the Empire. Things did not go particularly well, and the Asavean emissary ended up cursed by imperial citizens. The Tarquinius family did their nut and made all kinds of demands for reparations, demands that largely came to nothing. At the following summit, autumn 379, the Imperial Senate passed a short-lived law making it illegal for imperial citizens to engage in trade of bourse goods, including white granite, with Asaveans. That law was quickly repealed, but not quickly enough for the Tarquinius. Already smarting at the insult to their family caused by the curse, they withdrew their offer and threw a massive strop that caused major waves in imperial Asavean relations. In time, a new deal was arranged between the Empire and the ambitious Heraclian and Ragnabe families, and the Cavabianca docks were finally built, but relations with the Tarquinius continued to decline. One of their ships was wrecked off the Brass Coast, and only some of the white granite they claimed was in the hold was returned to them. Several more Tarquinius vessels were apparently caught in magical storms raised by imperial magicians, causing them to demand all sorts of reparations from the Senate. But it soon became apparent that the reason these ships were in the Bay of Catazar to get wrecked in the first place is that they were engaging in trade of white granite, the same white granite they promised to the Empire, with the Grendel orcs at the Broken Shore. Further proof of this was gained when the town of Apulian in Spiral was liberated by imperial forces last summer 382 YE. Another scion of the Tarquinius family was captured, and he made no secret of the fact that he was there to trade white granite. He even confirmed that the Asaveans had an embassy in Dubtraig, the city of the Salt Lord Suriad, one of the leaders of the Southern Orcs, which at that time was not raided by the Empire. There's some confusion regarding this particular Tarquinius, but as far as anyone can tell, he ends up back in Lemuria, bad-mouthing the Empire, and the trade in white granite to the Grendel, as far as anybody can tell, continues to this day, allowing them to quickly build fortifications and castles in areas they've conquered. The Tarquinius are only one of the plenum families, but they are powerful enough that their continued opposition to the Empire causes a significant threat to any relations with the Asavean government. And also the white granite to the Grendel thing. During the Spring Equinox, 380 YE, the plenum sent a petition to the Empire. 3 high-ranking priests suggested the creation of an Asavean temple on imperial soil as a way to cement good relations and secure better trade. In return, the plenum would give permission for the empire to build a temple of the way, what they call a temple of the seven lords of virtue, in Nemoria, the Asavean capital. The Senate accepted the offer. A temple of the Asavean gods was built in Iran, on the northern coast of Feroz in the Brass Coast. There was some opposition from the synod, and work on the temple was delayed several times. In the end, though, a clear statement was passed by the Brass Coast Assembly encouraging the people of Feroz to welcome visitors from Asavia and to resist anyone trying to cause friction between them. Once work on the temple in Feroz was complete, the Senate was able to get to work constructing a large temple of the way in Nemoria. Despite doing so at the invitation of the plenum, some prominent Asavians were critical of the move, having serious concerns about the effect inviting priests of the way to preach openly might have, especially given that the religion is most closely associated with the Sumer Republic, avowed enemies of the Nemorians. Regardless, with both temples built, there was a marked improvement in trade relations between Asavia and the empire. The trade route to Nemoria became particularly lucrative compared to other similar routes, with imperial captains assured of additional profits of orichalcum and iridescent glowing for making the journey to the west. It was not all plain sailing, however. In summer 382 YE, for example, there was some question as to whether the temple in Nemoria should train local petitioners as priests of the way. The synod ultimately chose to allow Asavean priests, but only those carefully selected by the priesthood at the temple. They knew that as local citizens, these new priests would be able to bring the way to more people than the imperial priests could hope to reach by themselves, but also that some of those visiting the temple to petition for training were doing so with ulterior motives. Unfortunately, in being so careful who to recruit, the empire also reinforced the perception that there was something secretive and conspiratorial about the way. Then at the start of this year, the Grendel invaded Feroz. They captured Iran, but they left the Asavean temple unmolested, even though the priests had allowed some freeborn families to take refuge within their walls. Rather than looting the place, they simply allowed it to continue operating as normal, even going so far as to encourage the priests of Bailo and the Black Bull to preach their faith freely to freeborn citizens across occupied Feroz, something the empire had obviously prevented them from doing previously. Finally, a week before the summer solstice, news reached the empire that an angry mob had stormed the Temple of the Seven Virtues in Nemoria. The Asavean authorities intervened and arrested the instigators, but several of the priests were seriously hurt, one fatally, and the temple itself was badly damaged. The plenum apologised to the empire, denounced the attack on the temple, offered assurances that those responsible would face the full weight of Asavean law, and of course reassured the Senate that they had permission to repair the damage to their temple if they wished. So that's the current situation. 2 temples, an imperial temple ruined in Nemoria and an Asavean temple in occupied Feroz, one increasingly seen by the Asaveans as a centre for sedition and the other a target for increasing imperial concerns about the practice of idolatry. Indeed, it was only the fact that the temple of Bailo and the Black Bull was under Grendel occupation that saved it from the sledgehammers and chisels of the angry mobs that recently cast down all other statues of the false Asavean gods they could get their hands on, a subject I shall get to in a moment. Almodin Octistis was a respected priest of the god the Asaveans called Badu the Builder, the god of builders and architects. He came to the empire to work on the temple of Bailo and the Black Bull in Feroz, and as construction drew to a close in winter 380 YE, he made an offer to the Senate to stay on and oversee more commissions. In conjunction with the freeborn architects and builders with whom he developed a good working relationship, and in return for a generous stipend, he offered to oversee 2 commissions each season without using any of the existing resources of the civil service. Given that the Senate has only limited capacity to commission new structures, it's perhaps not a surprise that they jumped at the chance to take Almodin Octistis up on his offer. While his work on the palace docks, the first commission he was sent to oversee, was prosaic, the room forge in Redoubt, which he built a season later in spring 381 YE, was covered in depictions of Asavean gods and spirits. Likewise, the fortification of Alexandra's Watch in Lestasny was decorated with statues of bull-headed soldiers and mosaics of giant sea creatures, which looked a little out of place in northeastern Varushka. The Varushkans took steps of their own, and a year later all the idolatrous statues were stripped off the castle and used to pave a courtyard. But by that time, the architect, who was perhaps understandably not happy, had overseen 7 commissions, each one demonstrating his enthusiasm for covering everything in idols of false gods, to the increasing dismay of the synod. In summer 382, Almodin was brought to inquisition, and then in autumn of the same year his contract with the Senate was terminated and the synod condemned him as an idolater. Condemnation is a serious matter, and so Almodin was brought before the magistrates. He was tried and found guilty of idolatrous action. His punishment was exile, something he was all too happy to engage with, as he had by all accounts had enough of the empire by this point. He duly departed from Samos on a ship bound for Nemoria. However, the story doesn't end here. During the winter solstice, the Assembly of Pride condemned Almodin and his commissions as an affront to imperial pride. At the Spring Equinox, the Senate voted to redesign all 6 of his remaining unaltered commissions, at the same time as the Pride Assembly enacted a mandate to encourage the virtuous to take matters, and sledgehammers, into their own hands. In the following months, mobs descended on the buildings Almodin had constructed and tore out everything that might conceivably be seen as a depiction of an Asavean god. This significantly disrupted the functioning of these buildings, but luckily the Senate builders were able to repair the damage in time for the summer solstice. The mobs didn't just tear out the statues, however. They also took the decorations and repurposed them in such a way as to send a clear, insulting message to the Asavean priesthoods that they were not welcome in the empire. This message was duly received. The Asaveans were incensed, and the treatment of their gods, albeit in the form of statues and mosaics, may have led to the damage suffered by the Temple of Nemoria, which I've just mentioned. The scandal doesn't even end here. It's still ongoing. The Synod is still engaged in inquisition of the people seen as responsible for encouraging Almodin to spread his blasphemy, or possibly heresy, even after it was clear what he was doing. And then there's the question of what is going to happen if the Empire liberates the last remaining symbol of the Asavean gods, the Temple of Baal and the Black Bull in Feroz, as currently under Grendel occupation. But the instructions of the Synod were pretty clear that that temple, as with the statues and mosaics that Almodin had placed on commissions around the Empire, was to be destroyed. Through most of 381 YE, there were scattered rumours of trouble brewing in Asavia. It finally boiled over at the start of 382. Shortly after the Spring Equinox, the northern satrapy of Maracos lynched their satrap, burnt her palace in Aracos to the ground, and declared independence. A week later, the neighbouring satrapy of Enfidor followed suit. The Plenum obviously could not tolerate open rebellion, and immediately mobilised its armies to suppress the revolt. To their surprise, however, they discovered not a ragtag rabble of disgruntled nobles as they had seen before, but a serious organised military force, well equipped and well provisioned. The Asaveans said that there were clear signs of Sumar Republic involvement in these anarchists. This was nothing new. Sumar agents had been actively encouraging rebellion against the Plenum for decades, but what was new is that they were providing open military assistance in the form of military units and priests to the rebels in both Maracos and Enfidor. For their part, the Plenum reached out to the Empire, among others, asking for the aid of imperial mercenaries. Some made the journey to Asavia to support the Asavean government in ending the insurrection, but all did not go to plan. The magistrates raised serious concerns about imperial citizens killing Asaveans who were, legally, under imperial law, considered to be foreigners, even though they were rebelling against their own government. The Assembly of Nine went further, condemning those travelling to Asavia and leading to the Vigilance Assembly, urging citizens across the Empire to make note of anyone travelling to Asavia to help put down the rebellion. The Plenum responded quickly. They put all imperial mercenaries who did come to Asavia on defensive duties far from the front line. During the winter solstice, they approached the Senate to approve support for their cause, but at the same time, Terentio Comasigna, the de facto leader of the rebels, reached out to the Empire for aid for the rebellion. The Senate voted to allow imperial citizens to follow their virtue and fight either in support of the insurrection or as allies of the Nemorian forces seeking to crush it. At the same time, imperial traders took advantage of the opportunities to sell weapons and armour to the beleaguered rebels, engaging extensively in war profiteering with the temporary port of Fort Maragladia in Maracos. Most mercenaries from the Empire chose to support the Plenum forces attempting to restore order, and despite some imperial soldiers fighting on the rebel side, the insurrectionists were repeatedly pushed back. The rebel was effectively broken just before the summer solstice, despite an increase in the number of Imperials offering their support to the insurrection. Fort Maragladia fell, the rebels in Enfidor surrendered, and the short-lived insurrection was all over bar some mopping up and a spate of former rebels trying to flee Asavia for new homes aboard. While the Asaveans did not have it all their own way, crushing the insurrection as effectively as they did has sent a clear message to the rest of their satrapies that rebellion will not be tolerated. It's also likely done some serious damage to the Sumar presence in Asavia, and unfortunately may have made the Asavians even more suspicious of the way, although paradoxically the fact that the majority of imperial forces active in Asavia over the course of the rebellion were on the side of the plenum seems to have gone some way towards actually improving relations with the empire. During the winter solstice this year, everything became even more complicated as the Empire became a signatory to the Liberty Pact, an international agreement solidifying opposition to slavery in the wider world. This meant that the Senate immediately imposed trade sanctions on all trade with Asavia until such time as the Asavians were prepared to give up the practice of slavery. The plenum understandably was furious, not so much with the sanctions as with the way they were imposed. They immediately retaliated with sanctions of their own, restricting trade of imperial goods to Asavia. But at the same time, they remained keen for imperial mercenaries to help them put down the insurrection of their northern provinces, about which more in a moment. Asavia is keen to see the sanctions removed, but obviously the Empire can't do that and remain part of the Liberty Pact. The Empire, for its part, is urging the Asavians to abandon the institution of slavery, something they in turn can't do without seeing their entire society collapse. A stalemate, then, that will no doubt continue to complicate Imperial-Asavian relations for years to come. One last thing before we finish. The Grendel. The Asavians clearly have good diplomatic relations with the Grendel Orcs, potentially better relations than they do with the Empire at the moment. Among other things, Asavian ships are able to sail the Bay of Catazar unmolested by Grendel privateers. Some of those ships clearly dock at Dubtraig and trade freely with the Grendel salt lords. When the Grendel sacked Sarvos, the Asavian embassy there was left untouched, and there are even stories that an Asavian diplomat was able to negotiate the return of some of the stolen Sarvosan art treasures looted by the Grendel. The Tarquinius claims of an embassy in Dubtraig may not have been publicly confirmed, but it is an open secret that the Asavians are friendly with the Grendel Orcs. Indeed, there are several stories that during their recent problems with rebellious satrapies, the Nemorian naval forces were supported by Grendel mercenary fleets, for all that they tried to ensure Imperial and Broken Shore forces did not come into contact with one another. Both Asavia and the Grendel are slave-owning naval powers. The Asavians don't have much experience of dealing with orcs, and treat them as if they are mystical lucky creatures, which the Grendel are not above taking advantage of. The Asavians love exotic novelties and diversions, which the Grendel can supply them with in abundance. It's clear that good relations between these two nations are to the benefit of them both. Yet for all their braggadocio, the Grendel are not in the same league as the Empire, at least not yet. The Asavians cannot risk openly backing the orcs to the Broken Shore, not while there is any chance of repairing their fractured relationship with the Empire at any rate. It remains to be seen whether relations between the Grendel and the Asavians will continue to be a low-key business, or whether they will blossom into something more significant and potentially more threatening to the Empire in the years to come. That, then, is Asavia, the ultimate, it's complicated international relationship. I hope you found this useful. You can find further details of everything I've mentioned here on the main Empire wiki. A good place to start is anything that is tagged Trade Winds, and look for the section marked Asavean Archipelago. I'm hoping to cover the four other great powers the Empire has relations with, Sumar, Sarkafan, Commonwealth and Jarm, and then if there's time, maybe do a roundup of Axos, Faradon and the Iron Confederacy as well. If you think I've missed anything, let me know in the comments below.